We've gotten this before. Yeah, now that you say something, when I moved in shortly after, there's this tiny little spot on the ceiling. And now, 6 months later, it's gotten a little bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know what it's from. So I guess you could look at that if you wanted. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Glad I asked.
Yeah. Look at that.
Because sometimes people, they won't tell you.
Mm-hmm.
They really won't tell you. And it's not their fault. Just some folks don't know. Like they're not mechanically inclined. Maybe they've never owned a home before. Hey, you're listening to the Investment Property Geeks of Charlotte. We are your hosts, Chris
And Jesse.
And today we're talking about the routine walkthrough and how important it is. We're going to give you some real practical tips and tricks when it comes to those and why they're important. Some folks might have already tuned out by the time we said routine walkthrough. But what I will say is this is one of the most overlooked areas of managing a property, whether it's a manager doing it for you or you doing it yourself, because it's very easy to procrastinate. And the thought is, I might not catch much anyway. I might not see anything. And it is a lot of work. I'll be honest with you. It's a lot of work to do a walkthrough.
Especially if you've got multiple properties.
Especially if you have multiple properties. I mean, we do several hundred a year. And if you think about that, just coordinating or coming up with the system to make sure they all get done on time and get reported appropriately and all that and go to the right places is kind of a logistical nightmare. Mm-hmm. And that's why a lot of times management companies, especially those that don't have real good systems in place, say they should do them or should be doing them, but at the end of the day, they don't. It's one of the first things to go when they get busy. So, and as an owner, I'll say myself again, as a former DIY landlord, that is also an area where I would get too lax, and then you regret it once you do the final move out because you're like, I could have caught some of this stuff earlier. So
yeah, it comes back to preventative maintenance and like things you can find out. It's better to find out you have a problem before a tenant moves out than when they're moving out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Know what's going on with your property.
And we're going to give you, we're going to tell you what you should be looking for in those walkthroughs, how to inspect and do those things, comment some real cool little tips on common things you might come across. And then, how do you approach that conversation with the tenant? When, how often do you do them? All the goodies we're going to be disclosing. So, please make sure to leave us a review and give us a rating and subscribe. This podcast depends on being shared with more folks, and more folks get to see it when you hit that subscribe button or you leave a review. Also, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, comments, want to chat to Jesse, ask him what his favorite color is, anything like that, feel free to shoot an email to podcast@investmentpropertygeeks.
I will answer if people ask questions.
Exactly. podcast@investmentpropertygeeks.com. Check us out on Facebook by searching for Investment Property Geeks, or go to investmentpropertygeeks.com, where you can see all of our episodes and more stellar content, that kind of thing. What is your favorite color, Jesse?
If it's not incredibly obvious for people who are actually watching, it's blue. I mean, I think every time I go buy new clothing, typical guy, I'm just like, blue looks good.
Yeah.
So you go in your closet, there's like 77 blue shirts. So I feel like I need to mix it up a little bit.
It's like anytime you go on Banana Republic's website, it's like, now recommended for you, blue.
It's like they know.
And khakis.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. I look like I work at Best Buy. But navy blue, not the best. No offense to Best Buy, if anyone's listening. But anyway, so why is this important, the routine walkthrough? Well, we kind of teed it up already for you, explaining, Chris mentioned this in a prior example, or episode rather. Your home, it's basically as if someone gave you a briefcase full of cash, and within that briefcase there was $250,000 or $300,000, the approximate value of your home, depending upon where you are. If you've got a briefcase full of cash, tell me you're not going to check on that briefcase every once in a while. Tell me you're not going to check to make sure that the lock is still locking. Tell me that you're not going to make sure, you want to ensure that every penny of that money is still in your briefcase. And guess what? If you never check it, you're never going to know.
Yeah, exactly. And what might happen is over time, right? And that briefcase is out of sight. Over time it's going to wear a little hole in it, and money's going to start pouring out of the briefcase. Is it important to you to go by and check up on it every once in a while, see if you need to maybe repair it or something like that. And I think people just don't think of it that way. And if more people thought of it that way, like, oh wow, I could be bleeding literally hundreds of dollars a month if I don't.
Yeah.
It might change their attitude.
I think people get comfortable with routine, and you have a tenant that's paying their rent, and heck, maybe you even have a tenant that's there for the long term, and you think to yourself, oh, I don't need to go check. They've been there for 4 years now. They pay on time. They're quiet, no issues. Well, you've done yourself a great disservice, because that cash flow that you're getting month over month is important, but the overall value of your asset, in this case the briefcase, as we're beating this example to death, that is so important to your long-term success as a property owner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have this older couple that are friends of the family that we know and adore, sweetest people. They told me this story one time of, he's like, oh yeah, I rented, when I was first getting into property management, he's like, oh yeah, I rented a property out one time. And anytime someone starts with that, I could just know there's an awesome story coming.
Teeing it up.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And again, this guy is a handy guy, right? Mm-hmm. Older guy, like a man's man. That's how I describe him. And, he tells me he'd rented this property. The tenant had paid, cash every month, paid on time, no issues, like nice guy, but he never checked up on the property. And eventually the feds came knocking on the owner's door and were like, hey sir, do you have any idea what's going on? He's like, no. And he's like, well, your tenant runs one of the biggest drug rings in the area.
Yo.
Yeah. And he's like, have you been checking up on the property? And he's like, no, sir. He's like, well, had you been checking up on the property, you would realize that the house is full of cocaine.
Wow.
And, they're riding motorcycles around all over the property, tearing the place up and yada, 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 yada. And he's just like, that was not the best way to find out what was going on at the property. So not every scenario is going to end like that. But I say that because these routine walkthroughs, they're important.
Absolutely. And it's funny because my example more so was thinking about a well-qualified tenant and you possibly missing a maintenance issue. But my gosh, I didn't even consider going the other direction. What are, seemingly good tenants doing behind closed doors?
Yeah, hey, they pay me cash every month on the first. There's never a maintenance request, Jesse, in 10 years.
Imagine that refrigerator's...
They've never asked for anything in 10 years. They are the world's best tenant. Well, guess what? They're probably trying to hide something.
There it is. And you're never going to know unless you get out there and inspect that briefcase / investment property.
Exactly.
So in terms of an inspection, what are you inspecting? Well, really, it's the entire property itself. And, of course, you're looking both interior and exterior, allowing yourself enough time to get out there and do a thorough inspection. Chris, let's start with the outside. If you're going to go to the home, what are some of the things you're looking for in the outside of a house?
Yeah, well, great question, Jesse. And let me start by saying, there's like a certified inspection, which, I just paid for a property that we're buying here in Charlotte, and you pay professionals to do that. Now, it was for a property that I knew fairly well. I'd been out to several times. Guess what? I still paid the $500-ish for a certified inspection. Why? Because those guys are trained to look for things that we may not be able to see. We may not know exactly how to look for them. And I just wanted the peace of mind to know exactly what I was buying, not just what I thought I was buying. And sure enough, they found a couple things that, weren't huge deals, but it's like, oh, okay, well, I thought that maybe the roof had some issues, but you just went and with your expertise, you verified that it does need to be replaced. So
$500 for peace of mind.
Yeah. So, I mean, don't any property management company, these are visual walkthroughs that we do. And if you're doing it on your own, obviously you're not an inspector, but there are some things that you can look for and you can probably get 80% of it. So on the outside, really, I guess if you're only going to take away one thing from what should you be looking for as far as physical condition of the home, is water is usually, especially here, usually your biggest enemy in terms of either humidity or rain or leaks or pipe bursts or that kind of thing. So you want to be looking for what are ways that water might be getting into the home or being in places that it shouldn't be. That's if you kind of follow that, that's going to take care of a big category of issues. And so that could mean like, hey, looking up at the roof, if the roof is really discolored, Might be time to get a roofer out there, see if it's time to replace it. Are the gutters all clogged and water's flowing over the gutters or behind the gutters, that kind of thing. Be looking around the doors and the windows for signs of if all the paint is worn off or if they're soft or squishy. It's real common here around the bases of doors, especially like the back door, for the wood to rot away. That's common. Looking around seals of the garage, looking at the condition of the siding, looking for holes, places where animals might get in, that kind of thing. Those are all important. Obviously, you're going to be looking at the lawn, condition of the lawn, look for any trees. I always look for, if the property's in an older lot where there might be some more established trees, what do the trees look like above? Any dead limbs, things that are currently dropping on top of the house now that might be a safety hazard or causing damage to your roof.
Yep.
Do those trees need to come down? Also, are the limbs of the trees getting close to or over, worse yet, over the house itself? If the limbs of the tree, remember the root system on a tree goes out as far as the limbs do, or the canopy of the tree. So if you have limbs over your roof, guess where the roots are? They're growing up against or underneath or through somehow your foundation. So those are all issues to kind of be aware of on the outside of the property. There is a whole bunch more you could be looking for than that, but those are just kind of some tips and tricks. But do walk the whole property, look at the landscaping, look at trees, other environmental elements. If it's got a septic system, make sure there's no weird brown sludge coming up from the ground, things like that.
That could be a much bigger problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're also checking, of course, to see, how the tenant's maintaining the property then, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be honest with you, we've said before, 80% of the homes that we walk into because of how we screen tenants, usually we walk in and we go, wow, you're doing this is so much nicer than when the owner lived here. I mean, that's a really common thing. Not always, but that's pretty common. Now, what I will say is not every tenant has a green thumb.
Right.
So even though they might be doing a great job of taking care of the inside, they may not have been a homeowner before. Oftentimes our tenants are moving out of an apartment into a house for the first time. So they might need a little bit of help and education and reminder about how to care for that yard.
Which is what you can do as a property manager when you're out there.
Yeah.
Just gently reminding them, hey, this is part of,
Hey, I notice the yard's looking a little weedy. I get it all the time in my own place. Would it be okay with you if I recommended a product that I use that I find really helpful?
There you go. Tee it up that way.
Yeah.
How about the inside? Once you go inside of the house, what are we looking for?
Yeah, good question, Jesse. So my family gets annoyed by me because when I go into a house now, my eyes immediately go up to like the ceilings and the cracks, like where the walls meet the ceilings, and I scan around, and I'll do that anytime. Like I was at my parents' house in Idaho, like a year ago. I was like, hey, Dad, did you know you have a stress fracture in the ceiling in the laundry room? And this is like a new construction house. He's like, no. How'd you see that? And I was like, I can't help it.
The moral of the story, Chris is not judging if he's coming into your house. He's proactively looking for things.
It'll probably be socially awkward where I will have to like apologize profusely because I'll walk through the door. I won't even make eye contact with you. My eyes will just go up to your ceiling. And I'll be looking around. And here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for cracks, stains, like, hey, did water potentially come in at some point? And again, back to water. Any sort of warping that might be looking like it's going on, waves in the wall or the ceiling or the floor, bubbling that might be happening beneath the paint, that kind of thing. And so I think the first thing I do whenever I go into a room, that's what I'm looking for. And I'm looking around to see, what does this look like? Because it's so easy to miss. I guess that's why my eye does it first. So that's something easy. Every time you go into a room, just kind of look up and around. And then I don't know, this is where we're going to get really geeky for a second. If you want to be socially awkward like me,
own it.
Try practicing this, just going into different buildings, and all of a sudden you'll be like, oh man, they really need to take care of that. Like you will find stuff everywhere. You're just like, oh wow, there's a stain there. Why haven't they taken care of that? Oh wow, that must be a leak. And all of a sudden you'll train your eye for it. You'll start to see it everywhere, and that'll really help you when you're going in through the property. Probably a little overkill for the average person that's out there, but maybe you're a property manager, or a new property manager, or a broker, maybe a real estate agent listening to this
Good point.
Podcast. This would be a great tip for you when you go in the house. Try to be more socially appropriate than me just looking around all of a sudden making judgments. But be thinking about that. Hey, each room you go into, do that kind of visual sweep of the room and the walls. I'm also looking for, I'd say looking, not really. like my son says when he goes to the optometrist, I went to the eye dentist today. So I'm looking for smells. I'm smelling for smells. So, be thinking, do you smell anything musty? Do you smell a dog that maybe shouldn't be there? A cat, mildew, marijuana, anything else? How you handle those things, up to you as a property owner. But then we have a checklist that we go through, and I recommend you as an owner, you have a checklist too. Otherwise it's going to be hard. Like, it's going to be too easy to miss something because there's so many components to a home. And even us who do it all the time, like, stuff gets missed. It happens. We're human beings, and no matter how long you've been doing it, stuff's going to get missed. And so if you have a checklist, you're much less likely to miss at least the important things. So on our checklist are things like look at the walls, look at the ceilings, look at the floors, look at the baseboards and the molding, look at the light switches, look at the electrical plugs, look at all the fixtures, which would mean like fans and ceiling lights and that kind of thing. What about the window coverings? Do those function properly? Do the windows function properly? Do they close? Do they lock? Do they open in case of an emergency? Are the screens tattered or missing? What about how does the door function? Does it close appropriately? Are there signs of settling where maybe it's difficult to open or close, or it's warping? How about the hardware on the doors? Do the locks function appropriately? And then, of course, in bathrooms, we're going to be flushing the toilet, making sure it doesn't continue to hiss after it's flushed, making sure it's not wobbly. Looking for things like how is the hardware that's affixed to the wall, toilet paper holder, hand towel holder, bath towel holder, that kind of thing. Running the hot and the cold water in the sink. Here's a good tip. So for every sink in the house, you should run the hot and the cold water, open up the cabinet underneath, let it run for a while, and then take your flashlight on your phone, look at the plumbing, make sure you can't see water coming down, and then feel under the P-trap and around the P-trap while that water's running, and feel the supply lines to feel for any moisture. Because sometimes the drip's so slow you can't see it, but you can usually feel it. And then also look down at the base of the cabinet to see if you can see any signs of, again, stains, mold, softness, that kind of thing, any signs of leaks. We probably, in about, give or take 15% of our inspections, we catch a leak that way. That's actually, if you think about it, like, that's quite a bit.
That's not insignificant.
Yeah. And not 15%, but 15% of our inspections, we probably catch something like that.
Yeah.
It may not be specifically a sink leak, but it might be like, hey, gutters are clogged, or that, you got that. So, again, water, one of your biggest enemies, right up there with having a great tenant. So, we'll talk about why we're doing this in a little bit. So we're looking for that kind of thing, make sure the sink's working okay. And then, just kind of giving a look at the appliances to make sure they all look okay. You're not going to be super invasive while the tenant's in there and testing everything out. Hey, what's for dinner? Let's open the fridge, but I just kind of look at some of that stuff. And of course you want to take a look at the smoke detectors, make sure none of them are expired. Usually they're about 10 years old. Here's another tip. If they look yellow, they're probably expired. Especially here in the South where the sun tends to beat things up. If they're yellow, they're probably been sitting in the sun long enough to turn yellow, which is usually past their useful life. So there are some firm requirements in the state of North Carolina about what type of smoke and carbon monoxide detectors you have to have. That all depends on how many stories you have, what type of appliances you have, whether or not you have an attached garage, that kind of thing. All things that we can help you out with if you would like. But we're not done.
Well, wait, there's more.
Jesse's like, I'm regretting asking you this question. It goes on forever. All right. So, soft spots in floors, and you can kind of look across the floor maybe to see that. Also, the old fashioned just jump up and down. That'll sometimes work too. Here's another one that I tell folks is another good tip, an area where we often see damage. If you've got a shower, right in the corners of the walls, right next to where the shower door is, if it's like a step-in shower, or even if it's like a bathtub with shower combo, you can kind of look in the same places. That's a very popular spot for water to go. So if you go up to the shower and you open it up, that side where the door attaches to the wall, like, water tends to go right there, and we'll see rot there oftentimes. So, like, just feel right there and look there, and sometimes it might be squishy. If it's squishy, take it apart and take care of it right away. We had that happen in our house. My wife used it as an excuse to do a $30,000 bathroom remodel.
Wow.
Now, did we really need to do all that? No. But of course, once you open up a wall and you say, hey, this looks a little soft, she's like, that's it. I knew we had to remodel the bathroom anyway. So, so be careful if your spouse might use it as an excuse to do a remodel. But that is it's usually if you catch it early enough, you can usually fix it pretty inexpensively, even if it's progressed quite a while. And we see this all the time in properties like that owners are buying. We did one where the water damage, it actually wasn't caught in the inspection, and the broker didn't catch it, and the owner didn't catch it. But we're doing our walkthrough of the property, and we're like, hey, that looks soft. And then I poked at it, took a screwdriver. That's another tip. You can take a screwdriver. If the screwdriver goes into it, or your keys sinks into it all, chances are there's water damage. That water damage ended up going about 4 feet up the wall. But we were able to, take care of it, air it out, dry it out, do all the right stuff. But
if you're sensing a trend, we talked about it externally and internally.
It's not the only thing, but it's the most common, significant thing is
absolutely.
Water. Yep.
No doubt.
Yep. From natural or unnatural sources. Yep. So just be careful of water. That's your number one enemy, I think, when owning a property typically. All right. Another tip, check those air filters. Again, easy to do, easy not to do. We put our folks on a subscription service, so they get them every quarter. But here's the thing, folks. If your system is always working because the airflow is significantly reduced because those filters are clogged, guess what? Whose pocket's that coming out of? Well, kind of the tenants, but really the owners, because you're going to reduce the lifespan of that equipment.
Absolutely.
Also, if it's not a good quality air filter, it might be getting particulates and stuff like that all over the components and causing those to fail prematurely.
That is a very inexpensive fix. Not even a fix, a preventative maintenance item that you absolutely should be doing on your home. No question.
Absolutely. But I will say this, most properties that we take on that have a tenant in them that were managed by an owner or another management company have absolutely disgusting air filters. I think you've got to have a system set up, make it easy for folks. In fact, here's another little tip. If you're doing this on your own, be kind. So maybe if a subscription isn't in the cards for you, buy the filters for your tenant, and that could be one of the reasons for your visit. Hey, I got some filters for you, picked them up. I wanted to drop them off and go ahead and install them for you free of charge. And oh, by the way, I'm going to do a look around real quick just to make sure everything else looks okay while I'm at the property. That's a great little in. That if you're uncomfortable feeling like, hey, I'm intruding, that's a great way. One, you're not, as long as you do it appropriately. We'll talk about how to do that. But that's a great way to get yourself into the property and come by adding value.
Yeah, absolutely. So, anything else from the inside? I think we've covered.
I think we covered a lot of it. Obviously, use your common sense, look for stuff, be looking for things out of the normal. But from a property perspective, those are like a lot of the high level things you're looking for. So whether the unit is empty and there's no one living there or not, those are things you're going to want to be looking for.
And as cheesy as this sounds, Chris gave the example of looking up when you go into different buildings. I mean, seriously, if you're going to be doing property management on your own, that's something to start practicing. It's just something to start looking out for these things, because heck, I'm in this industry and I'm learning stuff even as I'm sitting here talking with you. So
yeah.
So there's always something else to consider. And it goes back to our original example, protect that briefcase of money.
Absolutely. But they're easy things to do.
Yeah. It's not hard at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Chris, I alluded to this earlier in terms of another reason you're going out, and that, of course, is lease compliance, making sure the tenants are keeping up with their end of the bargain and doing everything they had previously agreed to do. Talk us through some of those tips and some of those points.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to make sure the tenant is taking good care of your home. And you hope that you did a good enough job in the screening that really this is just kind of a verification, not so much a witch hunt, if you will. And most of the time, that's what it should be. Now, if you haven't done a good job in screening, or you have properties that tend to attract tenants that don't take good care of them, either because of how you have taken care or not of the property, or the price point, or whatever, then these are even more important. But what I will say is that you want to politely remind the tenant of their obligation to take care of the property. And you also want to just verify that they're doing the right job. So the big piece is you're going into the tenant and you're basically saying hey, I want to make sure that this property is performing for you and is a cool, safe place that you can call home. And oh, by the way, while I'm here, there's some things that I want to look at. Now, some of those are, I already mentioned, like lawn upkeep. So looking out for those types of things, landscaping. Make sure like cousin Bob isn't staying over and sleeping on the couch. You kind of laugh, but like we have seen items where folks will leave certain people off of the application and then they move in and, oh, guess what? This person who was denied before is now living there. And they were denied because maybe they have a criminal background, or maybe they had a bad rental reference, or maybe they had really low credit and we have a low confidence that they're going to take good care of the home. Well, I hope your lease is structured such that that's a lease violation and you need to remedy that. And there are some ways to look out for that. Like we've caught people before because they've left their name badge out in an extra room. If there are more to, like, there are other ways that you can prove that. Like when you go into the walk-in closets or whatever, if there are an extra person's clothes there that are very obvious, or extra toothbrushes, or maybe it's all males renting a place and there are several toiletry items, like doubles up sets of soap in the shower is another kind of clue, extra clothes, those kind of things. And depending on how your lease is phrased or structured, that may or may not be a lease violation, and that may or may not be something that you want to act on. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll say, hey, I don't know if you knew this, but this is a lease violation. Here may or may not be the fine associated with that, but at a minimum, this person needs to apply so we know who they are and we can verify that they're not like a registered sex offender or something like that. Extra pets you want to be on the lookout for as well. Look out for pet food, dishes, beds, hair, any of those types of signs, leashes that are hanging up in a closet. Those are all maybe some signs that there's a Fido or Fluffy or something like that on the premises.
If they say they have a cat and you're seeing, like you said, Fido's dog food sitting out there. Yeah. And that happens.
Oh, absolutely. It happens. Hey, you said you don't have a dog, or you said you don't have a pet, but there's a jar of cat food on top of the fridge.
And what's barking?
Can you help me understand that, please?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there were no pets allowed, and so I thought, yeah, okay. That does happen. Also, you want to be on the lookout for any sort of like anything that you might suspect is illegal activity. So, I went up to a property one time where I was, an owner came to us with tenants that he had he'd let in that were squatters. Yeah. And I went in to go do an inspection, and all the windows to the garage had black trash bags taped up. Sign number one. Then you go in the garage and it was full of appliances and electronics that were still in the box, multiples of each. Like, wow, these people own like 7 irons that have never been opened and 6 TVs that have never been opened, all the same in the box in the garage. That's odd. I wonder what's going on there. Or, if you see paraphernalia, or if there are a bunch of strange people over that you don't recognize, or there's a big you wouldn't see this necessarily during an inspection, but if there's like a lot of traffic, the neighbors might know. If there's a lot of traffic coming in and out for very short durations of time where people are stopping by the property, there might be, something illegal going on there, that kind of thing.
Chris, you make a good point. Neighbors could be some eyes and ears and boots on the ground for you, but that doesn't make up for you actually getting out there to inspect the property yourself.
Right. So
you might have a neighbor who says, oh, everything looks good, everything looks okay. Don't just take their word for it.
Yeah. And you can too, as an option, if you want to, depending on how you feel about this, you could go up to the neighbors before folks ever move in when you're doing like the move out inspection from the prior tenant or getting this one ready. If you see a neighbor out and about, you can introduce yourself, give them your card or your phone number, and just say, hey, I want to be a good landlord.
Exactly.
I don't want to be a slumlord. I don't want anyone to ever think that. Here's my number. If you ever see anything that concerns you or you have questions or concerns, feel free to reach out, give us a call. Now, be warned, there are some people out there that are going to abuse that. We've got a neighbor that calls in anytime, I don't even know the person, but anytime someone drives through the cul-de-sac, like in front of, like 10 feet from her mailbox, she sends us an email from her doorbell video camera. Like, hey, there's someone in front of my mailbox again. It's like, I'm really sorry, ma'am. You just need to call the police because I can't do anything about it. I don't own a tow truck. I don't know who they are. Like, so beware. Like sometimes people abuse you that way.
So clearly it's a double-edged sword, but I would agree with Chris. I think having that relationship, even if someone across the street is crazy and calling you left, right, and sideways, you run that risk. But being a good neighbor, I think, is just a professional way to introduce yourself to someone right across the street who can be, an extra set of eyes on your property for you.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately, too, I mean, you're also looking to make sure that the tenants aren't doing any sort of damage, and they're really taking care of the inside of the property. Mm-hmm. If you do see damage, most of the time, what people fail to do, common mistake that's made, is people go, I'll just take it out of the security deposit. Well, what happens when you're like in month 3 and you see $200 or $300 worth of damage and you ignore it? One, that sends a message to the tenant, maybe it's okay. 2, there's probably going to be several more instances of that by the time they move out, because they might not move out for a few years. Mm-hmm. And then they won't have enough security deposit to cover the damage. So what we like to do is, unless it's a situation where we think it's just going to break again and it makes no sense, or it's a really low dollar value, oftentimes what we'll do when we see damage, which is pretty rare, but when we do see damage in the middle of a lease, we'll actually send someone out to go fix it and then send the tenants a bill mid-lease. And we'll say, hey, saw this damage, had to take care of it. By the way, this is your bill, and wanted to let you know that the expectation is that you keep it up. And that'll help set the tone early on, because that really alerts people like, oh, geez, they're serious. Like, they're not going to let anything slide. Yeah, hey, we're going to be professional, courteous. I'm going to fix things that I'm responsible for, but guess what? You're going to pay for things that you're responsible for. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a helpful thing. Yeah.
So when do you want to do this? How frequently?
Yeah, good question. So definitely you want to do an inspection on move-in. We actually have tenants, what we've found has worked really well to kind of take our liability out of it, is for tenants to do their own move-in inspection. That and moving in is such a stressful time anyway, but you have to have a really good mechanism to make sure they actually do it. So we give them 3 days from when they move in to do their move-in inspection, and they got to get that back to us. You definitely want to do a move-out inspection ASAP from when the tenant moves out. Listen to our episode about move-outs here coming up on how to do those and what that should look like and all the rules around that. And then you want to do at least one in the middle of each year. Now, if you're only going to do the move-in, the move-out, and you're choosing to only do one inspection per year, like let's say a tenant's going to be there for 5 years, and you do a move in and a move out, and you say, I'm only going to do one per year. What I would say is that first one, try to do it if you can, maybe 3 or 4 months into the lease. Don't do it a year into the lease, because give them enough time to get settled, and then let them know you're coming by. And that'll help you catch problems early on and set the tone early on, instead of giving it a whole year. A lot can happen in a year.
Yeah.
And then go annually or whatever from there. But I would say 1 per year is probably not enough. We do a minimum of 2 per year. We strongly recommend you consider doing 4 per year. That might sound like a lot, but we'll talk about that in a minute, about how you can approach that to where it's not. So I would say, Jesse, to answer your question, do at least 1 per year, please. And then do your move in and your move out. Ideally, you're doing a couple a year at least.
And you're teeing up my next question, Chris. How? Because in terms of, you have individuals who are saying, well, all right, I've already got a tenant in there. What's the most effective way? How do I communicate? How does this work?
Well, and I think a lot of tenants push back, right? Like, hey, it's an invasion of privacy, yada, yada, yada. A lot of owners say it's just awkward to do that. I think it's invasive. Well, there are invasive ways to do it, and there are proactive ways to do it. So let me ask you this. If the AC breaks every 6 months, do you think the tenant is going to mind having you come in there to fix it? No.
Simple.
Right. So if really you approach this from a point of, hey, I want to take care of the home for you so that you don't have to worry about it, and you don't have to live like most tenants have to live, wondering when their landlord's going to come by and fix XYZ. If you kind of approach it that way, I think it becomes a much easier conversation. You're still going to get pushback. We still do.
Sure.
But, tough. That's the law. It's my asset. It's my briefcase full of cash. I'm here to make sure it doesn't have any holes in it. I want to be respectful to you as another human being and treat you with courtesy and everything. But the law's the law, and ultimately you're living in my property. And we as managers have a responsibility to our owners to check up on the assets. So, but there's a great way to do that. So here's how we tee it up for the tenant. We say, hey, we're going to come by. We don't call it an inspection. We call it like a preventative maintenance walkthrough.
There you
go. Because really most of the time that's exactly what it is. While we're there on the preventative maintenance walkthrough, we're looking for some other items. But really what we say is like, hey, these are meant for you. We want to make sure your property is ship shape and you have a place that you are proud and happy to call home. So quick question for you, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant. Before we come out there, is there anything that you would like to make sure we take a look at that's been bothering you or you've been concerned about while we're out there, just to see, or that we just need, you want us to get a second set of eyes on? And usually most tenants have never been asked that question. But oftentimes there are little things that kind of nag tenants, but it's like, it's annoying, but it's not enough to get them to put in a work order or to call you about. Kind of like going to the doctor, right? And what can be really bad is like, what if your doctor, I'm sure the doctors see this all the time. Like if someone's like, man, I had this lump and it's just been kind of annoying, but like, it hasn't been annoying enough for me to really come in and see something about. Well, if the doctor would have never asked you that question, you might not have found out it's something much more serious. Well, same thing here. Every once in a while, I just hear this little drip and I don't really know what it is or where it's coming from. And it's just kind of annoying. Well, guess what? That's something you want to know about as an owner. I've been seeing this. We've gotten this before. Yeah. Now that you say something, when I moved in shortly after, there's this tiny little spot on the ceiling. And now 6 months later, it's gotten a little bigger and I don't really know what it's from. So I guess you could look at that if you wanted. Oh yeah. Okay. Glad I asked.
Yeah. Look at that.
Because sometimes people, they won't tell you. They really won't tell you. And it's not their fault. Just some folks don't know. Like they're not mechanically inclined. Maybe they've never owned a home before. That kind of thing. So approach it that way. Hey, this is for you. We're here to do preventative maintenance and we want to take care of the property. Is there anything that we can do for you while we're there? Anything you'd like for us to look at? Anything that we should be thinking about that really needs to be fixed that you just haven't had the time to submit a work order for yet? Again, approach it from a point of servicing the client, right? And then what we're going to do is, you're really showing folks that you care. So that in and of itself will send a message of like, this undertone to that is, wow, I'm doing this out of place of caring and love, but you better take care of my property because I care for my property. That's the other undertone that it sets.
Yeah.
In a very kind, nurturing way.
It's a good precedent actually, because it's the WIFM, the what's in it for me, for the tenant, because you are of course trying to be proactive in helping them. But yet, like you said, Chris, you're getting out there and inspecting the property and showing you care, not just about them, of course, but about your asset.
Right. And when you show that you care, they're naturally, most people are also going to care more too, because what gets paid attention to typically gets done. So, now there's a question, Jesse, you said like, when do you go out there? So there's this question about like how much notice you should give. Now, here's what you should not do. You should not be like a former client and on your way home from an international trip, choose to schedule a layover in Charlotte to show up at the tenant's door unannounced, knock, and insist on being let in. You should not do that.
No, don't do that.
And if you are as jaw-dropped as some of you might be right now, yes, that actually happened.
Wow.
That was a very interesting conversation to have with a client. But don't do that. Don't do that if someone's managing your property. Don't do that if you're the landlord. You are looking for a suit that you probably will lose and rightfully should. Now in North Carolina, it's going to be different everywhere. Most states have this statute that refers to some sort of reasonable notice. That's what North Carolina says. North Carolina doesn't define what reasonable notice is. It's up to interpretation. We interpret that to be typically 24 hours if we suspect something fishy. Otherwise, most folks, they get plus or minus a week. So recently we had one where we're like, wonder if something's going on here. We really want to know. We're not going to give you the courtesy of a 1 week heads up. We're saying And it is 2:59 p.m. on Thursday. By the way, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, we're going to be by tomorrow at 3 p.m. These are the things we're going to be looking for. Blah, 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 blah. And then we have that documented. So if they ever do come back and be like, landlord just showed up and this is so unfair, you can go to the judge and say, no, actually, here's the proof of when I did it and when I inspected, et cetera, et cetera. So, but if they're a good tenant, like realize that it can be kind of invasive. So you don't want to just give them what if they're like someone who loves to have a really clean house and they are super embarrassed and mortified when you come over? Or some people have very interesting things they do in the privacy of their own home that are totally illegal, but also might be embarrassing for them, whether or not they're truly embarrassing. But like, you want to make sure you give people adequate time to put those things away, or, their privacy concerns, or they might have family staying with them. And hey, if they're a good tenant and they're paying on time and in general, they're taking care of your property, and they're like, hey, I'm so sorry, but I have company that week. Is there any way we can reschedule? Use your judgment, but let them reschedule.
Yeah.
Don't like hold their feet to the fire on it. If they've been a great tenant and normally it's okay, like be human, understand you want them to stay there. They're the customer, but at the same time, it's your briefcase full of cash. Don't be irresponsible.
Yeah. I would say, you might be the property owner, you might be the property manager, but while they're living there, that's their home. So you always want to remember that.
I'm so glad you said that, Jesse, because, I think unfortunately what a lot of new investors and just people who are renting out their home for the first time, they forget. And obviously these people who stop by this house unannounced in Charlotte on their way home from an international trip forgot is what I tell people is, and this is going to create some controversy. This is no longer your house. It isn't. It's not yours. It's your briefcase full of money. That's it. You don't live there. It's not yours. It's theirs. And so you need to treat it like that. And I think a lot of people are going to have heartburn with that. But I'll tell you, if you can look at all of your investments that way, where you can be detached and say, hey, it's not mine. One, it's going to help you because when someone does damage it or doesn't treat it well, you're not going to take it personally. Two, it's going to help you make much more objective decisions about whether or not you really should fix this thing up or do this, that, or the other thing. And third, it's going to help keep you a little bit more in check and compliant with the law, hopefully, where you don't make irrational emotional decisions. So that's why I use a briefcase, and I'm glad you did too, Jesse. That's why I use a briefcase full of money example so often, is because if you can detach it from, hey, this is my house, to, hey, this is my briefcase full of money, and it's the tenant's house, I think you're going to be way better off, and you'll be much more likely to want to grow your investing business in the future.
And think of the positive returns you're going to get from that tenant that's a good tenant that said, hey, listen, I know you need to come over, but it's my kid's birthday. I've got my aunt visiting or something. Can we reschedule? If you show some flexibility and some compassion and understanding with that, man, that's going to go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it goes back to turnover is really expensive. So you have every right as the landlord to say, no, I can't reschedule. Now, I think there's an argument about whether or not if they didn't allow entry, like that's different. There's that whole argument that we're not going to go there, and I'm not going to give advice on that because that's so contextual and case specific. But I mean, you do have a right to be there, but ultimately, that the way that tenant tells you to buzz off is when they don't renew their lease, and now you're potentially out thousands of dollars to go turn over your property again, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Yep.
So you got to balance that, like, hey, keep it in great and nice shape while we're there, make sure everyone's compliant, make sure the house isn't getting damaged, and you got to balance that with, but I also don't want the tenant to leave because they're frustrated every time I come over.
Yeah, it's a balancing act. Find the happy medium. Find what makes sense.
Yep, absolutely. All right. What else, Jesse?
Conducting yourself throughout these, and we're kind of already teeing this up. Like, how do you behave when you go to a home? So, of course, you're going to be professional. I mean, it should start with that in your communication with them, as just mentioned. Be respectful of their time. Make sure, of course, they're being respectful of yours as well. But when you're actually on the property, you're doing that introduction. You're professional throughout. And this goes without saying. You're going through the home. You're not going through their stuff. Because, again, remember this briefcase full of cash example that we keep going back to here. That house, the belongings that are now in that house are the tenants.
Yes. Do not open their dresser and go through it.
Right. Do not infringe on their privacy in any way, shape, or form.
Now, what you can do is like open the cabinets under the sink. I would say if you're very suspicious and you're trying to catch something, you could, this is really awkward to do, and I would not recommend doing this on every property. But if you're really trying to catch someone doing something that you are convinced they're not doing correctly, here again, consult with your attorney. But my always, what we kind of tell our team is, if it's part of the house and then you can basically be inspecting the structure. So like, for example, hey, I need to look into this drawer under the sink to make sure that it's working correctly. Well, okay, now there's men and women's perfume in there and man and women's toothbrush when there's only one guy that's living there. Okay, well, now I found what I need to find, take a picture, done,
Right.
Or you go into the walk-in closet, or you open the closet and there are clothes for clearly two different size people or something of that nature. That's all things that I think, you're probably okay doing, but don't go open the armoire that's theirs, or look under their bed, or pull open their nightstand drawers, or that kind of thing. You are cruising for a bruising.
Right. What you're talking about, you're justifying an inspection or an evaluation versus actually infringing on their.
Yes, exactly. I'm saying
privacy.
you can look at, because those things are all part of the property that you're
Right.
inspecting. Their bed is not part of the property. Their
Yeah.
nightstand is not part of the property. So that kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely. And, like Jesse said, be professional. Introduce yourself if they're unfamiliar to you. Also realize, like, you're not their friend. Well, this is another point we'll talk about, but like, you're not their friend, you're not their buddy. So like, don't assume just because you're there, you're their house guest. And what I guess I mean by that is, be friendly, but realize they may not want you there. So don't stick around and like make it this socially awkward thing where you just keep talking about the weather and recent politics, and they really might not care or want you there.
That
right?
comes back to you being respectful of their time, of course.
Right. Or they may have taken this time off from work to meet you there, and they really got to get back to their job. Don't hang around and like make small talk. Just thank them for the time, be professional, and move on.
And in your experience, Chris, do they need to be there?
No. So we always tell folks, like, hey, look, this is when we're coming. You don't need to be there.
Mm-hmm.
You are more than welcome to be there if you'd like to. We're not going to tell you no, but you certainly don't have to be there. Don't worry. We've got a key. We know how to get in. But before we come, we do ask, are there any, even though we think we know if there are any pets, because this is a good way to catch people too. Sometimes we say, hey, are there any pets that we need? Do you have any pets in the home? And or are there any alarm systems or anything else that we should be aware of when we arrive? Just leave it open-ended, because you never know. They might be like, yeah, my cousin Bob's visiting. He's on the couch, And by the way, Bob owns a shotgun. Oh, okay. All right. Good to know. Thanks for telling me. I guess I would say too, like, a lot of folks are going to be tempted to make friends with their tenants. Like, hey, you moved in. Now I want to be your friend. Okay, I get that. Don't.
You can be friendly without being
Be friendly.
friend.
Don't invite them. Don't invite them over to your house. Don't, because unless you have, even if you have a property manager, don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
But how are you going to be objective and make the decisions you need to do about your briefcase full of cash if you've got this friendship in the way? It's just going to be really difficult to be like, hey, so I'm here to look through all your stuff and make sure you're complying with the lease. Mm-hmm. But by the way, I know you know where I live and you know my wife's name, and so don't go there. Yeah. Also too, I would say when you're there at the property, we already talked about this, have a checklist as far as how you're going to do it. Take lots of high resolution photos. Most phones are going to be fine for that now. I mean, the cameras on our phones are really quite good. As long as, I don't know, I guess some phones are quite good. I've seen some that are not so good. So be thoughtful there. And then put those photos in a logical place where you're going to be able to find them several years down the road. Should someone come back at you and try to come back and say, hey, that wasn't really damage. Also, consider having that photo somehow time-stamped. Ours are all time-stamped and geotagged in our reports, so that there's no question about where that picture was taken and when it was taken. And then ideally, again, like I said, that checklist you've got of room by room to help take you through that. You can also consider using video in your walkthrough. Just make sure you're doing it slowly enough that you're getting everything. That can be kind of tough. And then think about, well, how are you going to submit video as evidence down the road? It might be easier to submit pictures and that kind of thing. Another little tip, I think we talked about this before, when you are taking those photos, try to put like a pen sometimes, and like if you got a carpet stain or smudge to the wall or whatever, for perspective and to point out very clearly what it is that you're taking photos of, what damage. Put a pen in there, put your finger or something like that in the photo to point out exactly where.
Yeah, I'll reiterate. This is a really great tip because, again, you might look and see something that's clear as day to you when you're in the property, but then you go home, you look at photos. Well, where's that stain? I know it was there somewhere, but it kind of just blends in a little bit more.
Yeah.
So something for some perspective makes a big difference for those photos.
Right, and you don't want someone going to court and be like, that stain wasn't the size of a shoe, it was the size of a dime, and you just blew up the picture. Well, here's my finger right next to it.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. That was a lot. A lot of good nuggets, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Jesse, what would you say to kind of wrap things up?
In an instance like this, first and foremost, it starts and ends with communication effectively with the tenant, making sure they understand what you're going to be doing and why you're going to be doing it. That is going to be crucial to setting yourself up for success anytime you are doing these inspections. But as Chris went through before, there are a litany of different things you're going to be looking for actually at the home, both external and internal. And knowing what to look for, and the more you do this, the more practice you have, obviously, the better you will become with it. That's going to make protecting that briefcase full of cash that much easier for you in the future. We've talked about this before. Preventative maintenance is something that's so important. And if you can correct something that's minor now before it becomes major later, you're in just such a better position. And yeah, just to summarize, I think effective communication with the tenants, getting out to the property on a regular basis, determine what works for you, and checklist. Have a checklist and be consistent so you know what you're looking for at every property.
Awesome.
I miss anything?
I think you're good.
Cool. Well, with that, we are the Investment Property Geeks of Charlotte. I want to remind you to leave us a review, subscribe, or send us an email. We'd love your feedback, and we are counting on people like you who are listening and finding some value in this to share this information so we can continue to grow. And in the meantime, this is Jesse and Chris wishing you a brighter life in real estate.